Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining the Hudson Library tonight for our author event with award-winning author David Rosenfelt. He's joining us this evening for a conversation about his recent book, The Terrier, which is book number 30 in his popular Andy Carpenter series. It's so nice to see so many people out tonight, and it sounds like there are many devout fans in the audience tonight, just in conversation I overheard tonight. It was so nice to see how many people came out tonight to meet the author and hear him talk tonight. Before I introduce Mr. Rosenfelt tonight, I do want to mention an upcoming author we have coming up. Since you're here for a mystery author, we do have one more mystery author coming up in November, on November 19th. New York Times bestselling author Reese Bowen will be joining us virtually for a conversation about her new book, We Three Queens. So you can register online at the library's website, hudsonlibrary.org. It's a virtual event, so you can just join from home and listen to the conversation with the author. And we do have November brochures in the back if you would like to pick up on your way out. We'll have all of our upcoming programs for the month. Well, we are delighted to have with us tonight award-winning author David Rosenfelt. He's the Edgar-nominated Edgar-nominated and Shamus Award-winning author of 30 Andy Carpenter novels, including One Dog Night, Collared, and Deck the Hounds. Its spin-off series, The K-Team, the Doug Brock thriller series, and standalone thrillers. Mr. Rosenfelt and his wife live in Maine with an ever-changing pack of rescue dogs. And I'm sure, as much as we would all love to hear about his book tonight, I'm sure we would like to hear a little bit about the many dogs that he and his wife live with as well. How many do you live with now? Oh, just 11. I think I read on your website, the last time I checked your website, it said 27. Wow. So I'm sure we would love to hear a little bit about that adventure as well. And if you haven't already gotten your copy, the Learned Owl is with us tonight in the back. You can get your copy of The Terrier, and she also has some other of Mr. Rosenfelt's books for purchase, and we'll have an author signing after the program tonight. So please join me in welcoming David Rosenfelt.
Thank you. So, you hear me? So I actually won't be talking much about the Terrier tonight because I don't remember what it's about. I've written 3 books since then, and believe me, they all blend together. So I'll talk about my various careers. The first one was in the movie business. I was president of marketing for TriStar Pictures and executive vice president of MGM United Artists. And I was the least successful marketing executive in the history of Hollywood. I buried more movies than any other 5 executives. And they were movies with real stars. I mean, it was Bruce Willis in Sunset and Blind Date, Arnold Schwarzenegger in Running Man and Red Heat, Meryl Streep, Still of the Night. Just jump in if you've seen any of these, okay? Tom Hanks, who has more $100 million movies than anyone in Hollywood. I buried 3 Tom Hanks movies. Nothing in Common, Every Time We Say Goodbye, and Volunteers. Jim Henson and George Lucas, who are arguably along with Walt Disney, two of the top 3 people in family entertainment. I killed a movie that Henson and Lucas collaborated on. It was called Labyrinth. Yeah, everybody has that reaction, like it's become like a thing now. Trust me, there's more people in this room than saw Labyrinth on its opening weekend. So, I don't think I'll tell them. If you want to hear movie business stories later, I'll tell them. But to end my career, we had a movie called Glory, and it was about African-American soldiers in the Civil War. A very good movie. And before it came out, they discovered the remains of these men in a mass grave somewhere. And the producer of the movie called me and asked if we would, as a publicity thing and also as a nice gesture, if we would pay to have them reburied with dignity. So, of course, it was like $50,000, and I agreed. So it turned out after burying movies for 20 years, my last act was to actually bury people, right? So I wrote a screenplay when I left marketing, and it sold. So all of a sudden, I was a screenwriter. When you're a screenwriter in Hollywood, if you're a B-list writer, like I was, they look for reasons not to make your movie, even if they bought the script. And it's because these executives are worried about their jobs. If they hire Aaron Sorkin to write a movie, and it fails, what do you want from me? I hired Aaron Sorkin, right? If you hire David Rosenfelt and it fails, you got a problem. So I sold 10 feature scripts, none of which got made. And one day I was in a meeting at Warner Brothers on a script that they bought. And it's called a notes meeting. They tell you what's wrong with it and what you need to change. And they were torturing me in this meeting about credibility, that everything that happens had to make perfect sense. And while to a degree that's true, they were overstating it. And I knew they were looking for a reason not to make this movie. So that night, I went to see a movie called The River Wild. Yeah, because it wasn't our movie, everybody saw it, right? It was produced by a friend of mine, and in this movie, Meryl Streep plays a whitewater rafting genius, and she's out on this raging river with her family, her husband and either one or two kids, and Kevin Bacon, who's an escaped convict, takes them prisoner, or captures them. And the reason he does so is because Meryl Streep is the only person good enough to get him down this river so he can escape. So about a quarter of the way into the movie, the husband, who's like this wimpy guy who's never been outdoors in his life, gets away. And he spends the rest of the movie going along the side and setting a trap for them at the end. And I'm watching this movie, having been tortured by credibility that afternoon, and I'm thinking, if the wimpy husband can go down the side, why does Kevin Bacon need Meryl Streep to get him down the water, right? So anyway, my next career was I moved into, a friend of mine was a major player in TV movies. He directed and produces them. And he talked me into writing a TV movie. And TV movies were the perfect environment for me, the perfect genre, because you have to have no artistic integrity whatsoever, right? You just write whatever they tell you and cash the check. I literally wrote a thriller about postpartum depression, right? So I sold about 10 TV movies and 3 got made. And each one was worse than the one before it. The last one was called Deadly Isolation. And it was a script I wrote, and 7 years later, Lifetime Network remembered the script for some reason and decided to buy it. So, very briefly, it was about a woman who lived on the coast of Maine, and her husband had died 2 years before, and she was still in mourning. And she lived with her 9-year-old golden retriever. And there was going to be a political regatta off the coast, and not that far from her house. Anyway, a guy shows up pretending to be injured, and she helps him and takes him in, and he pretends, she doesn't know this, he pretends to be, by coincidence, a friend of her late husband. And the trick is for him to get her to fall in love with him, to have him stay in the house for 3 weeks, so he could commit an assassination when the political regatta happens, so he'll have been in place before security arrived. So Lifetime buys it, but they don't want it to be a political assassination movie. They want it to be that the deceased husband was a jewel thief with the scam guy, and the wife didn't know it, but after the last heist, the scammer guy never got the jewels. So he thought that the jewels were hidden in the house. So that's why he was there. So I said, that's fine, but if I were the guy and I thought the jewels were hidden in the house. Instead of spending 3 weeks getting her to fall in love with me, I would tie her up and search the house, right? But they didn't want to do that, right? And I couldn't have cared less if they wanted an aardvark to be the villain, right? Whatever they wanted, I was going to write it and cash the check. So there was, I'll just say, one scene in the movie. They go out on the ocean in her boat, the two of them and her elderly golden retriever. And when she's not looking, he throws the dog in the ocean. Am I going to kill a golden retriever, do you think? So, wait till you hear the payoff. He jumps in and saves the dog, thereby becoming a hero in her eyes. You see? Right? It's just like Shakespearean. So anyway, it was a low-budget Canadian production, and they didn't have the money to go out on the ocean. So they went out. It's like a viaduct, right? Like as wide as this podium. And so the water's very placid. So the guy throws the dog in the water, and the dog is swimming happily along, right? It was just awful, awful. Anyway, so one day I decided to write a courtroom drama, and they don't do them in TV. They didn't do them in TV movies then. They still don't. So I wrote 50 pages of a novel. And I gave it to my agent to read, my film agent to read, and he liked it, so I finished it. So he sent it to a book agent, and she sent it to one publisher, Warner Books, and they bought it with 3 sequels. This whole process, from the time I started writing it to the time they bought it, was about 7 weeks. So now all of a sudden I'm a novelist, right? But, so anyway, so the book was called Open and Shut, and it was very well received. The sales were okay, but the book was, Edgar nomination was really well received. But what happened was I get a call from my editor when I first sold him the book, and there were some scenes in it, about 7 of them, that were flashback. These books, Andy Carpenter talks in first-person present tense. And there were some flashback third person where Andy couldn't have been there. Right? He wasn't at the murder 7 years ago, so I wrote it from a regular narrator's point of view. So the editor says, loves the book, but you got to take out those scenes to go from where you went to third person. It's a cheat to the audience, to the readers. So I had no idea what I was doing. So I said, fine, so I took them out. About a week later, I was reading a James Paterson book, and in this book, he did it on every other page. And we had the same editor, right? So I called her and I said, Sarah Ann, James Paterson does it. And she said, but he's a bestseller. But she said it like that's one step above pedophile, to be, right? Like it was to be frowned on. Anyway, Open and Shut is the first example of one of 3 things, I guess there are, that I think make me unique as a novelist. And that are the stupid mistakes that I make in these books. So in Open and Shut, for instance, Andy Carpenter is a Paterson, New Jersey attorney, and he represents a guy named Willie Miller, who's been on death row for 7 years. And he gets him off he gets a new trial and an appeal, and he gets him off. Fine. So the book comes out, and about 2 weeks after it comes out, an emailer writes to me and points out that New Jersey doesn't have a death penalty, right? So poor Willie sat on death row for 7 years, right? It was pathetic, really. So anyway, the next book comes out, it's called First Degree. And it's an example of the difference in levels of artistic integrity between publishing and TV movies. They send me the book jacket after I write it, and it shows a guy on a bridge looking down at what we assume is the murder scene. And that's not in the book. So I said to the editor, why don't I just put it in the book? I don't care where the murder takes place. And you'd think I was messing with the Mona Lisa. I mean, so they said, no. So it was very well received. And Publishers Weekly said I was one of the top 5 rising stars in fiction. They have since retracted that with an apology a poignant apology to the readers. The third book was called, whatever it was called, Bury the Lead. And that's pretty mediocre, actually. That's not a very good one. But it did well because it was a Today Show book of the month. Janet Ivanovich picked it, so we went on the show together. It was very nice. The fourth was called Sudden Death. What? I'm sorry, what? It was called Sudden Death, and in this book, which is one of my favorites because it's about football, but Lori, his girlfriend at the time, leaves him and goes to Wisconsin, small town, northern Wisconsin, where she grew up, and she's going to be the chief of police there. She had been a cop in Paterson. So the fifth book was called Dead Center, and in Dead Center, Andy goes to northern Wisconsin to work on a case, and they reconnect. So this is the second unique thing about my writing, is that I do absolutely no research. It's like Googling is exhausting for me. So I write the book, and I don't really remember that much of the plot, but it has to do with the bad people, the villains bringing stuff across the border from Canada. And I write the book, and I send it to the publisher, and I say, here's the manuscript. While you're reading it, I'm going to get real town names, look at a map, get real town names in northern Wisconsin to replace the fake names I used when I wrote the book. So I did, and it turns out there is no border between Canada and Wisconsin, right? Canada is bordered by Michigan, Minnesota, and Lake Superior. Wisconsin's. So now I have to change it. So I said to them, well, let me change it to Minnesota. But I couldn't do that because Lori went to Wisconsin in the previous book. So now I had to fly the stuff across Lake Superior. So we had to put an airfield in this dinky little town. And I got creative, and somehow Andy solves a case having to do with them not having filed a flight plan. And then every pilot in America wrote to me and told me, you don't have to file a flight plan, right? So, as you can imagine, my career was fading rapidly at this point. So the next book was called Play Dead. And Play Dead was the first book, and was going to be the last one, right? And then what would American culture be today? So Play Dead was the first one in which a dog was integral to the plot. So they put a golden retriever on the cover, and it sold twice as many copies as any previous book, right? And the writing was no better, so clearly it was the dog, right? So the book did so well that I told them I would write a seventh book. And the third thing that makes me unique is when I write a book, I have no idea where it's going. It just starts and goes. I can't plan 3 pages ahead, literally. So I agree to write book 7, and a day later, they send me the book jacket. And it has 2 dogs on the cover. It has a Bernese and a golden retriever. So I literally wrote the book to the jacket, which is not how Hemingway used to do it, right? So that's actually not a very good book. It's probably the weakest of the Andys. Anyway, it's downhill from there. There's been 22 more Andys or thereabouts. They all have dogs on the cover. If I rewrote the Manhattan Telephone Directory, it would have a dog on the cover. And now I do a Christmas book every year, of which this is one with increasingly embarrassing titles. Dachshund Through the Snow, right? Silent Bite. I mean, it's cringeworthy stuff. So, what's that?
Santa's Little Yelpers.
That's one of the worst ones, yeah. So a number of years ago, I decided, since it takes me about 5 weeks to write a book, I have a lot of free time on my hands, so I wrote a standalone once a year for like 9 years. And the first one was called Don't Tell a Soul. You're not that discriminating a reader, are you? Anyway, Don't Tell the Soul was, it was going to be called Can You Keep a Secret? And then just as it was about to be printed, I decided I wanted to change that because it was sounded like a domestic abuse movie for Lifetime, right? But the story was a guy comes into a bar on New Year's Eve. He goes up to our hero, who's a stranger to him, and he said, I killed a woman named Sheila in Kinnelon, New Jersey, and I buried her body behind a thing in the park. Our guy freaks out, and he goes home, and he starts Googling Sheila in Kinnelon, New Jersey to see if there's any missing persons, right, if this guy was telling the truth. Anyway, so we changed the title to Don't, and when the guy comes up to him, he tells him this, and he says, can you keep a secret? Now, we were changing it to Don't Tell the Soul, so I rewrote the scene when it was at the printer. So now, instead of, he does the whole thing, he tells about, about the murder, and he says, but don't tell a soul. In the rewriting, I accidentally left out the name Sheila. So now, if you read the book, the guy comes in, tells him the story, doesn't mention Sheila, and our guy goes back and is Googling Sheila in Kinnelon, New Jersey, right? Anyway, the second one, standalone, was called Down to the Wire. Very mediocre. The third one was called On Borrowed Time. And again, it's an example of the problem I have where I can't think ahead. So it's the only book I ever sold where I sold 50 pages and sold it based on that. And they were the best 50 pages I've ever written. It was about a guy who's in New York City, meets a woman, they fall in love, they live together for 6 months. He buys a ring to ask her to marry him. They go up to her parents' house in upstate New York where he's going to ask her to marry him. They have an idyllic 4 days with her parents. It's great. They go for a ride on the last day, and it starts to get dark and stormy out. And it gets so dark that the lights can't cut through the darkness, and the car rolls over in a ditch. It gets light. She's gone. And the police come. They can't find her. She wasn't thrown from the car. So he thinks maybe she was disoriented and went back to her parents' house. So they go back to the parents' house, and the mother comes out and says, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't have a daughter, and I never met you. Everybody in the town says the same thing. He goes back, he's freaked out. He goes back home to New York. Everybody they knew in New York says the same thing. This woman never existed. The jeweler denies ever selling him a ring. There's no trace. So I sell it to the publisher, and because they publish thrillers, I tell them it's not going to be science fiction solution. Well, now what? Right? It took me 3 months to type another word because I had no idea how to end it. Anyway, the fourth book is called Heart of a Killer. Heart of a Killer is a great concept and a really good book. It's about a woman who's in prison, her daughter for murder. Her daughter on the outside has a congenital heart defect, needs a perfect match for a transplant. Can't find one, of course, and the mother wants to give her heart to her daughter, killing herself in the process, but her daughter is going to live a full life. The state won't let her do it, and she hires a lawyer, and the lawyer reopens her case, like looks into it, and because she's innocent, and tries to get her off, and it becomes a thriller. So the book comes out, and about a week later, we're having dinner in Maine with friends of ours. The husband is a world-renowned hematologist at Johns Hopkins, and he was nice enough to have read the book. And he said, I don't really know how to tell you this, but you don't have to be a perfect match to be a heart transplant. He said, it's not even important. And if it was, it wouldn't be the mother, it would be a sibling. So the entire premise of the book is bullshit, right? The whole book is based on her being the only perfect match. Anyway, it goes downhill from there. Airtight, which was another pretty good book, standalone, in my mind is remembered for the line, they found the victim lying face down on his back. Okay? That's literally in the book. Okay? Oh, I left out a beauty. I'm sorry, I left out a beauty. Remember the Andy book where there are two dogs on the cover called New Tricks? Laurie gets shot in the thigh in that book. and she almost bleeds to death. And there was a real-life Washington Redskin football player at the time named Sean Taylor who actually died that way. But I wrote in the book that Lori was shot in the thigh, and the reason she bled so much is that the bullet severed her carotid artery. Right? Now, it's in the book. Now, in my feeble defense, she was originally shot in the neck, and I changed it in a lot of places and forgot to change that one place. But to this day, that's now 17 years ago, 2 weeks don't go by without somebody emailing me. I'm a nurse, and I should tell you that the carotid artery is not. Anyway, so there were a bunch more standalones. Then I wrote 4 books were called K-Team books, which were spinoffs of the Andy books. And then in 2007, let me talk about dogs for a little while. In 1993, I met my wife, and she had a golden retriever named Tara, who's the greatest dog in the history of the world. And about 6 months later, she got nasal carcinoma. And it took 3 months from then till she died. And excuse me, they were a transforming experience for us. And when she died, my wife wasn't ready to get another dog, and I was, but we didn't. And we started volunteering in the animal shelters in LA County. And they're horrible. They're just horrible, right? So one day we were in the lobby of the Baldwin Park shelter, and that's really the worst of the worst. And this guy comes in with his 3 kids, and they're probably like ages 8, 10, and 12 in that area. And they're turning in their 1-year-old lab mix. And when you turn a dog into the Baldwin Park shelter, at least in those days, you had to sign a piece of paper saying you understand the dog could be put down after an hour, okay? Because there's not waiting for an owner to show up. They know who the owner was, right? It doesn't happen that fast usually, but it depends on how overcrowded it is. Anyway, we overheard them talking, and they had gotten this dog 10 months earlier at that shelter, but now it's full grown. It's not cute anymore. So they're turning it in, they're signing the paper, and they're going into the back to get a puppy. Okay? So, in what was not my finest hour, my wife annihilated this guy in the lobby, right? Like in front of his kids. Like she just took them apart while I'm off to the side, pretending I don't know. Anyway, so they left without getting a dog. I'm sure they must have come back when the lunatics were gone and gotten one. But we rescued that dog. So that became our first rescue. So we decided it was too passive to just sit there and watch dogs get put down and be rescued, sent out as guard dogs, that kind of stuff. So we started a foundation through which we ultimately rescued 4,000 dogs. But when a dog that we rescued was old or sick or blind or epileptic, we couldn't place it in a home, right? Nobody wanted it. So, what are we going to do? We're not going to leave him in a cage. We got him out of a cage. So they came home as our pet. So when you have 2 dogs, getting a third is a big deal. When you have 27, and they tell you that a golden retriever in Lancaster, California is going to be put down at 3 o'clock, you get 28. So we got as high as 42. But we think that anything over 40 is eccentric. So we try and keep it down below that. But in California, we never had less than 25. I mean, imagine everybody in this room was a golden retriever. That's what our house is like. So anyway, so in 2007, we were caught our house was caught in the fires. And we were evacuated. And we got out with 27 dogs and a duffel bag in 2 SUVs. And 25 of those dogs went into a shelter. A friend of ours ran a really good shelter in Irvine, California. And we were allowed to take 2 to a hotel. And for 8 days, we thought we lost the house. Because when we left, the flames were there. So a woman writes to me in the middle of that, and she's a rescue person from, I think, Maryland, but I didn't know her, and she didn't know me, but she knew of us and somehow knew we were in California, and she was writing to ask how we're doing, are we stuck in the fires? So I said we were, and we had just bought a house in Maine for when my wife would ultimately retire, which was going to be 5 years away. But we can't take an apartment in LA with 27 dogs. So I said to her, do you have any idea how we could get to Maine with 27 dogs? And she didn't. But she must have put it online, because in the next 3 days, I got 171 emails from strangers offering us their house on the way to Maine. So it's like, if you come through Topeka, you and 27 dogs could stay here, right? It's amazing. I mean, the dog subculture out there of people is remarkable. But the house didn't burn down, unfortunately, because my wife was head of worldwide media for Taco Bell Corporation, and he does a lot of business with MTV, and they were going to film our trip as a reality show. So I would be John Grisham today if the house had burned down, right? But anyway, so 4 years later, now we're ready to do it. And we still have no idea how to do it. And ultimately, we decided on RVs. So 9 people, most of them readers that we didn't know, we flew into California, and we drove cross-country on 3 RVs. And it was, am I over my time here? What are we doing? And it was miserable. It was horrible, right? Is my point of view. The other 10 people think it was the greatest adventure of their life. I mean, an anniversary comes up. This is now 13 years later. An anniversary comes up, and they all email, remember that time in Iowa City, right? I mean, it was horrible. We got 200 feet of plastic fencing. So every time we stopped, the dogs wanted to get off, and we had to form our own dog park, right? And now these are old, arthritic dogs, right, Laurie? But the problem is, if you've ever been on an RV, and I have RV PTSD, I'm never doing it again, they run out of gas every 20 minutes. You fill it up, and you go a block and a half, and you have a quarter of a tank left. So we had to stop all the time. So it was just, I can't describe how horrible it was. And so these people flew out to California, spent a week. I mean, even if you liked it, it was no, walk in the park. It was a lot of work. And what it taught me about, I'll be honest, what it taught me about this from their point is, you never volunteer for anything, right? I mean, it was just atrocious. Anyway, so I wrote a book about it called Dog Tripping. And dog tripping did very well, and by my standards anyway, very well. And it opened up a new area for me for my fiction work, because it was nonfiction, obviously, and so different people reviewed it. It's like in a different literary area. So I did a lot of national publicity. It was really good. I didn't always work out great. I did one called, it was a show called Fox and Friends, right? And we did it in the plaza at the News Corp building in New York on 48th Street. So they asked me if my son and daughter-in-law and, at the time, grandson, I think maybe my granddaughter was also born, but at the time, they said, she was active, they asked me if I could bring rescue dogs to the interview, and I said no. But my daughter-in-law is active in rescue in the city, and she got her group to bring dogs, and they brought puppies. So there was a little area set up with puppies, and unbeknownst to me, the producer told my grandson he could play with the puppies. So we do the interview, and it was like 10 minutes, the 3 anchors and I was charming as hell, I'm telling you. You think I'm charming now? I killed it, right? I was thin. I don't think I exhaled twice the whole interview, right? I mean, I was really good. Anyway, the interview ends, and literally 10 seconds later, I get a text from a friend, and he said, "Where were you?" And it turned out the anchors and I, all of us, were on camera for less than 10 seconds because they were watching my grandson with the puppies, right? So about 2 weeks later, they DVR'd it for him to see when he got home. So about 2 weeks later, I'm at their apartment, and his name is Oliver. And as I'm leaving, I pick him up and I say, Oliver, thank you for being on television with me. And he said, you weren't on television. Right? So anyhow, I'm wrapping up here for questions. But so I wrote a book after that called Lessons from Tara. And there's two things that are distinctive about that. One is the book I've written that I like the most. Out of 44 books, I like it the most. And it did by far the least well. And I don't know, it's like a sort of a sequel to Dog Tripping. And they want me to write a third one, but I'm out of dog stuff, right? Like I'm spent. Even in Lessons from Tara, when you sign a contract for a book, you agree to write a certain number of words. So Lessons from Tara was supposed to be like 65,000 words, and I didn't have 65,000 words to write, so maybe I had 61. So I went back and I did things like, if you read the book, it's like, instead of saying, I took Cherokee to the vet, I say, I got a leash, I put it on Cherokee, we walked out to the car, we went to the vet. It's another 20 words right there, right? So there's a bit of fluff in the book. But anyway, so the More the Terrier is the latest. I was doing 3 books a year, now I'm doing 2. The next one in July is called Dogged Pursuit. And I don't remember the title of the next Christmas one, but it's embarrassing. Which was the bite? No, I already did that. Anyway, I don't remember. But it's terrific. I haven't written it yet, but it's extraordinary. Right? So, anyway, that's my story. Anybody have any questions?
Are you coming out with any more standalones?
No. I may do more K-Team books, but the standalones, I really liked the standalones that I wrote, and because it's like real writing. It's not. Andy's me, right? So it's not just me talking. It's, to tell you the truth, when I wrote Dog Tripping, right after it, like literally the next day, I started writing an Andy book. And Dog Tripping is me talking first person, present tense, and the Andy books are Andy talking first person. And I was really surprised how identical our voices were. I really was. No, seriously. But anyway, I'm like known as the dog guy. So, people refer to them as the Tara books. She's not really a player in these books, right? So to write standalones, they just don't do as well, so. I mean, they do okay, but,
Heart of the Killer is my favorite opinion that I've written of the standalones. But I love Andy's series.
I liked Heart of a Killer.
Yeah.
Yeah. Even now that the whole premise is bullshit? Any questions? Yes?
Since you've been in the TV business, you probably wouldn't want to put any of the Andy Carpenter, like on the mystery channels, that they've done a lot of, like Joanne Fluke, and you've done TV shows or series.
You think I wouldn't want to?
Would you?
Did you bring a check? You could buy the rights to them. All right. I would love to. Andy almost got sold a while back and didn't work. The most aggravating experience I've ever had in that area was Dog Tripping. Steve Carell signed to produce and star in a film version of Dog Tripping, and it still didn't get made. That was really aggravating. I bought a suitcase to carry the money home in, right? And it didn't get made. It was really aggravating. I'm annoyed that you even brought it up, to be honest. It was, yes?
I'm curious about the editing, if they did catch some of this stuff.
Yeah, I can only assume, oh, here's a beauty. About 6 books ago, I write this book, and I don't remember which one it was. and I get an email from a reader about 4 weeks before it's going to come out, and she read an advance copy. And in the book, the mafia guy in the area, Joseph Russo, gets killed. This is embarrassing even for me to say, right? Joseph Russo gets killed. And she says, how could Joseph Russo get killed? He died four books earlier, right? So my initial reaction was, that's not possible, right? So I look it up, and not only did he die, he had his head blown off, right? So I wrote back to her that it's a medical thriller, right? But we couldn't change it, right? It was too late. So it literally came out that way. So in subsequent books, it's now Joseph Russo Jr., his son. But that was really a bad one. Even I was cringing at that one. But anyway, in terms of the editor, I can only assume that they catch 99% of them and not, there's just so many mistakes, I guess, because these are not people that just proofread my books, right? They're people a publisher employs. So I can't explain it. So, anybody else?
Do you have any recommendations for someone who's trying to start, to get a book published, or how do you go about that?
I really don't. In my case, I just had it easy because I had a film agent, and he had a connection to a book agent. Agents are what you need. If you don't have an agent, nothing's happening. And I'm told that you can go to these conventions and that agents frequent them, but I don't know. I was so lucky for me that I didn't have any of that struggle. So I don't know. But you got to have an agent. I mean, if not, they don't talk to you. Is what I'm told anyway. So, yes. It's, well, now we're down to 11 because in New England, there's no rescue problem. So they don't need us, right? We don't place dogs in homes. We just have dogs in our own home, and we only take in dogs that are blind or epileptic or whatever. And we get most of them from down south. But we have 11, and 5 of them are Mastiffs, 200 pounds each. But our house, not so much now, but previously, we only have old dogs, right? So they sleep all day, right? So you walk around our house, it looks like a Civil War battlefield, right? And it's like there's bodies everywhere. And then if FedEx pulls up, forget about it, right? It sounds like a fox hunt in our house when FedEx pulls up. But it's insane. It's an insane lifestyle. I wrote a lot about it in Dog Tripping, and in Lessons from Tara. It's just a lunatic way to live, but they all get along. They all get along. Well, now, keep in mind, when somebody asks us to take a dog, the one deal breaker, the one thing that we won't take is a dog that is anyway dog aggressive. So we know going in, now that doesn't always work, but I think we've maybe had half a dozen fights in 25 years. So, yeah, that's not a problem. And I think rescue dogs are like grateful or something. I don't know. So, yes.
Are Pete and Vince ever going to treat Andy
No, it's not likely.
as
Oh, no.
always pays the bill?
Right. Actually, the next book, which I didn't hear the last thing you said. The next book, which it's called Dogged Pursuit, which is pretty embarrassing on its own, but it's a prequel. And in the book, Andy adopts Tara, meets Pete, goes to Charlie's for the first time, meets Laurie. So we see his relationship with Pete early on, and he still has to buy. But yeah.
We read several of your books, and we love Marcus.
Yeah.
Who do you envision? I mean,
No.
if you had a movie, who do you see looking like?
I have no idea. Keep in mind, and it's not so much Marcus, but I used to be in the movie business as a marketing guy, right? So it was my job to know every actor and actress in Hollywood, right? If not personally, then, know a lot about them. And now I'm like a dinosaur. I don't know anybody, right? So people ask me, who would you like to play Andy? And I'm thinking Peter Falk would be good, right? I mean, I have no idea, right? So I don't know. I don't know. My agent wants me to do a book with Marcus as the lead character, but I just can't. There's like nothing there for me,
So where do you get your inspirations for your plots?
I don't.
You wouldn't say I mean, the news or
No, no, I honestly don't. I never even have an idea. And I'm serious. It's because how it progresses. So I can get to page 250, not even know who the bad guy is, right? Or even what the underlying crime is. Like there's always a murder, but there's always a criminal reason for there have been a murder, and it just happens eventually. I don't. I just started a book now, the next year's Christmas book. I have no idea where it's going or what it is. I wish I did. It'd make it a lot easier. Really, seriously. Anybody else?
I just wanted to say that I read lots of authors and lots of different books, and one of the things that I love most about your writing in the Carpenter series is the sarcastic humor. Yes. Please continue the sarcastic humor.
Where does that come from, I wonder? Yeah, thank you.
Laugh out loud. And, I read many different people, and there are things that are amusing and make you smile. Yours at times always make me laugh out loud.
Thank you. I have two problems with that, actually. No, really. One is that I have a tendency to do too much of that, and because these are murder mysteries, right? And early on, my editor would have to go over my manuscript with like a glib remover, right, to get, to make it less funny. But the other thing is that these are serious. If you extract the humor, they're serious plots where people are dying, right? So you have to do it. You have to do the humor in a way that it doesn't, take away from that, detract from that.
I still think he's going to make that kick and get on the Giants team. So.
What's that?
I still think he's going to make that field goal and get on the Giants team.
Yeah, he could play for the Giants now. And the Giants kicker just got hurt. The second kicker got hurt. Please don't. Thank you. Is that my signal to get off the podium here? Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.